Any strategy changes? You have to ask right off the bat. Is there any strategy changes that you have in your mind since the last we spoke? Now that you know, now it's time to go. It's go time here, Kevin. Are you feeling anything different? Are you get a receiver at all costs? Are you play the board, make sure let it fall to you? Are you getting more picks? What are your strategies as the draft is now approaching?
I really haven't changed much over the last few weeks because I've been on the wide receiver train right along. And then that only amplified after the Stephon Diggs trade. And I really haven't budged because we talked about that price range of how far you want to trade up. And I think this is going to be a great talking point tonight because I think I'm right in the middle. I want Bean to be aggressive, but not too aggressive. I want him to trade up and get that wide receiver. I don't think it's wide receiver or bust because this is a deep class. But I think that you have to be aggressive. If you traded away one of the best receivers in franchise history, you can't just sit on your hands and let the board fall to you. You have to go make the moves yourself. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you have to be overly aggressive because, like I said, this is a very deep class. And just because they don't trade into the top 10 to get one of the top 3 wide receivers, we don't have to panic. The Bills don't have to pull a Sammy Watkins here and say we have to trade into this X position here when you can go get an OBJ or a Mike Evans or someone of that caliber. So I think it's just very, very interesting to see how Brandon Beane is going to operate because he's traded up each of the last 2 years. He traded up for Kyer Elam, and then he traded up for Dalton Kincaid. So if you trade up for a guy like Kyer Elam, who most likely would have been there for you, I would have to imagine that he's looking to move up. And to all the reports that we've heard, it seems like he's aggressively trying to move up.
I want to do some of my own research and obviously just quantifying it based on, if a player has been successful in this league or not. I mean, it's a little bit subjective, but I tried my best to be objective in my reasoning. Definitely a pretty good note of that since 2018, picks number 5 to 21 have a 56% success rate in this league. I wanted to dive a little bit further to how that could look if you take it another step further. Picks 5 to 11 are 6 for 6 since 2018. So it's been top 11 player has been good. A lot of times there's been a big high bust rate. That's really in the middle where people are not sure who these tier 2 receivers are, and that could play a role tomorrow. Picks 12 to 21 only have a 20% hit rate, only 2 hits so far from picks 20 to 21, but picks 22 to 36 and an 85% success rate. So you have people really starting to adjust to what they believe the values in different tier section, people reaching maybe getting some bad and confused quarterbacks in there. But I mean, if that was true, then the top 6 would have a little bit worse of a rate than they do. So a lot of people are like, well, the bad quarterbacks. Well, technically pick 2019 should have, they maybe should have quarterback established. But the picks from 22 to 36 since 2018, obviously we have Moore, Ridley, Hollywood Brown, N'Keal Harry, one of the misses. We have Deebo Samuel. We have Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, T. Higgins, Pittman, Bateman, the other miss, Christian Watson, Flowers, and Addison last year. So that's a pretty good hit rate. Does any of that change your perspective on, utilizing that this middle has been a struggle in the league, 20%?
It's funny that this corresponds because right along I've been saying that I think that the sweet spot to trade up to is pick number 22 with Philadelphia because Brian Thomas is still my guy. I've been saying right along Brian Thomas or Xavier Legette. And we've talked on this show in the past about potentially trading up too far and reaching for Brian Thomas. And for what it's worth, I've seen a lot of mock drafts that have Brian Thomas slipping to pick 28 of the Bills. So according to a lot of pundits, they could stay at 28 and they don't even have to give up any picks or assets for Brian Thomas. I don't know if that's because of the report about his labrum with that shoulder injury or whatever have you. But for what it's worth, a lot of mock drafts that I've read over the last couple of days have Brian Thomas getting drafted by the Bills at pick number 28. But now with this T. Higgins news with Cincinnati saying that he's requested a trade because they can't reach a long-term deal, now you got to start looking into the teams. Can Cincinnati draft Brian Thomas? Will Jacksonville draft Brian Thomas? Will a team like Pittsburgh surprise people and draft Brian Thomas? So before we get into it, I guess I'll just kind of leave it right there. How do you feel about that, Kevin? I mean, do you think that it's a valid idea to trade into the teens for Brian Thomas? Or do you think that's a guy, especially now with that shoulder injury that came out, do you want to have a moderate trade? Or are you more on the aggressive side and say, you know what, if we're going to give up that many assets, let's just jump in and try to get Rome Odunze?
I'm into the percentages. So although the 22 pick would still fall within the range of where has been successful, I don't know about the trade up to 22 just to kind of fool the statistics a little bit. Like, I think truly the more the issue isn't necessarily the exact slot of the player, more the tiers. So I think people are reaching and they're going with certain types and they're missing with certain players in that range. It's more likely to happen. So what I'm saying is, if you're likely to get in this draft specifically one of the top 3 guys to mitigate your risk, I think that you have to consider what the cost of that would be. And as we go through some of our final mocks that we've had, both Kevin and myself, we'll kind of show our strategies as well as do a live mock here that kind of uses all this data that we've been talking about and what we're looking for. But I'm not really for getting up. I'm right in that sweet spot. I really am looking at that 9 to 11 range. So I'm looking at the back end of that range of the first tier guys, probably thus being the receiver 3 at that stage, and most likely being Rome Odunze. So that's really where I'm thinking, because I think that's where the cost benefit is with making sure that you got a couple players off the board. You may only have to trade a 1 and a future pick next year, and maybe a later day 3 pick this year. That's where my mind's at. To come up to the top of the second tier, let's say it's Brian Thomas Jr., I don't know how much better I feel over that, trading whatever pick away. Depending on how high you go, that could be 22. I mean, it's a little bit higher than just giving away a 4th. So you're probably looking at 2 4s. You're probably looking at a 4 and a 3 next year, some variation of that compensation, which I would just rather just go for and to secure a for sure talent rather than maybe decide who's the best of the second tier. Maybe sit pat because the numbers are already good in your range in receiver. So if you can't get up there, maybe you sit pat for Worthy. Maybe you stay pat for Troy Franklin. Maybe it's Leggett. Maybe it's Lad McConkey, depending on who that they prefer. So that's kind of where my mind is at with the trade up. Are you opposed to a full trade up, not just a miniature one, or what is your final thoughts on getting up to the top 11 or 12?
I'm glad you asked, because I was going to say, I'm not opposed to trading up into, let's just say, pick number 9 to get Rome Odunze, because I think that he is going to be a stud. But at the same time, for the reasons that I laid out at the beginning of the show, I don't think that the Bills have to do that, because I've been saying this right along, that the Bills are trying to build window number 2 for Josh Allen's career. And let's not forget, this wide receiver, assuming that he gets selected in the first round, he's going to be here on a cheap rookie deal for 4 years. So you're going to have dynamic top-end talent for 4 cheap years, probably pick up that option for year number 5. And then if you can sign him to an extension, that probably rides out with Josh Allen for the rest of his career. So this is a very, very important draft. That being said, I don't know if the Bills want to deplete their resources. And we've talked about this before. I don't see them wanting to give up that first round pick or other corresponding moves that you were mentioning here with this Odunze pick. So that's why I think it's a very fine line that you have to balance, because on one side, I see it where it's like, oh man, if you got Rome Odunze, go get him because we're in win now mode. But at the same time, as much as you're trying to win now, you're also trying to win in the future. And with such a deep wide receiver class, maybe you can get by with a more moderate trade up to get someone like Brian Thomas. I guess if the board kind of fell off at Odunze, you would say, do what you have to do to go get that guy, because there is a severe drop off. But considering how much talent there is, I don't think that you have to go make this trade.